on this computer. There we go. All right. So let's begin lesson 3 or episode 3 of our weekly Tanya class, which is as promised in the original email. This is the life-changing Tanya class, not because of who the teacher is, but because of the content of the Tanya. The Tanya is a map into ourselves. It's not a biology class, but perhaps it's a spiritual biological class to help us better understand what we are, what we're made up of, how we operate, and therefore how to best improve this entity called ourselves. So last week we got into a bit of a Talmudic sort of back and forth, if you will, as far as what exactly are the terms tzaddik and rasha. Hold on, I just want to check with a couple of our regulars to see if they're coming before we get carried away. Who else are we missing? We're missing Vicky. We're missing Larry. I think that was it for last week. Okay, so we were talking about the different levels of a tzaddik, and I feel like I need to go back and just review the different opinions and what they mean exactly. So the Talmud says that there are two types of tzaddik: a full tzaddik and a complete tzaddik and an incomplete tzaddik. Yeah. And then we have the Zohar, which talks about a different description of what a tzaddik is. But the Talmud says that the complete tzaddik is one who experiences good in this world, and the incomplete tzaddik is the one who experiences evil in this world. So in other words, if you are wondering why some righteous people go through this life with suffering, that's because they're righteous, but they're not completely righteous. And if you're wondering why some righteous people go through this world with no suffering, it's because they are completely righteous. So the terms of tzaddik v'tovlo, tzaddik v'ralo indicate a tzaddik who experiences good, who good is to him, meaning a tzaddik who experiences good, and tzaddik v'ralo is a tzaddik whose bad is to him, meaning a tzaddik who experiences bad. Now, the way the Talmud explains that, it implies that those descriptions of good is to him or bad is to him is a description of the experience of the tzaddik, but doesn't describe what that tzaddik is. It's merely telling us that the person who happens to be an incomplete tzaddik experiences evil. The one who happens to be a complete tzaddik experiences only good. But the Zohar goes on to say that actually those terms of good is to him or bad is to him is not just describing his experience, but is actually telling us what really is that tzaddik deep inside. And so the Zohar says that a tzaddik to whom good is to him is a description of what that tzaddik is. Meaning to say that this is the kind of tzaddik that good is the only thing that exists within him. In other words, any bit of evil has been completely obliterated, eradicated, gotten rid of it entirely. But the tzaddik who bad is to him is a description of another kind of tzaddik. What is that tzaddik? That is the tzaddik whom bad is to him, meaning he has conquered the bad within him. It's still there, it's present, but it's been tranquilized, let's call it that. That's not the word he uses here, but essentially that's what it means. That it's ineffective, it's non-persuasive, but it still exists in some form. And so that's why we call that type of tzaddik a tzaddik which bad is to him, meaning there is still bad within him, although non-operative. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we then go to the Talmud, which explains how do tzaddikim or rishayim operate. So the way, what happens in the psyche, if you will, of a tzaddik, or what happens in the psyche of a rasha, is that a tzaddik has one opinion being stated within his own psyche, and that is the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, and the rasha has only one opinion being stated, which is the evil inclination. And by the way, I was thinking about this. That would mean that the rasha would do everything wrong all the time. But that's not necessarily so, because there's a wide spectrum of what a rasha is, of what a wicked person is. And I was thinking perhaps you can say that if the only opinion in the rasha is the evil inclination, how come even very bad people do good things sometimes, right? If you look, for example, in gangs in prison, right? Which it's fair to say that most of them fall into the category of rasha, at least if we were giving these three choices, right? But even in that group of people, they still have their own, distorted, but sense of morality, right? They have, certain people are completely bad, even in their eyes, and we would agree with them that those kind of people are bad, right? So, and they'll shun that sort of people, right? So you might say, wait a second, maybe they're listening to their good inclination. And perhaps an argument could be made that they're doing that. But if they are actually a rasha, then how could they ever do good things? So one possible explanation is that they are listening to their evil inclination, which is saying that for your own good, you're best to stay away from those people. In other words, it's still self-preserving. It's still animalistic. And in that sense, it's still the evil inclination. But it happens to be that it coincides with doing the right thing, and so they do the right thing from time to time, maybe by accident. But anyways, we'll go more into the different categories in the later chapters, or I should say in the coming chapters. But the point that we're saying here, or that we said last week, that we're just recapping, is that the Talmud categorizes the tzaddik, rasha, and Beinoni in that the tzaddik listens to the positive inclination, the rasha listens to the evil inclination, and the Beinoni, the intermediary person, listens to both and hears both voices going on in their head.
You said the rasha?
The rasha, yeah. We're just speaking of it as a concept. I would presume there is more than one rasha in the world. Just like there's more than one tzaddik. So the Talmud goes on to say that there was an exchange between a rabbi and his student. And I looked this up on Wikipedia. Abaye passed away in the year 336 of the Common Era. He was born in the 200 something. And so his teacher was called Rabbah. So Rabbah made a statement. Rabbah said, look, there's the tzaddikim, which have only good voices in their head. There's the rishayim, which have only bad voices in their head. And there's the Beinoni. And I'm a Beinoni. He said, I'm a Rabbah. You can scroll down to where it says Rabbah declared. I don't know if you can see this screenshot that I just sent. Click on the image, you can see where we're up to in the page. But I would say scroll down about a third or a quarter from the top of the page in the link that I just sent. We're at the words Amar Rabba, Rabba declared. So, like I said in one of the previous lessons, I won't be going off the English translation word for word, but I will be quoting the Hebrew word for word. But it'll be similar enough, hopefully. If not, call me out on it. Amar Rabba. So Rabba said, speaking of a Beinoni, Kagain ana Beinoni. Here's an example. I am a Beinoni. Now, what's the problem with that? Abaye regarded his teacher, Rabba, as a very holy, saintly man. Said, Rabbi, or Rabba, if you're a Beinoni, then what are we? Right? So this is what he says. Amar le Abaye. Abaye responds to his teacher, Le shavik mar chaye lechal birya. The master does not allow life for any creature. If you are amongst the category of Beinoni, then there is no completely righteous person in the world. You're the greatest man I know. You're the greatest man alive. If you're a Beinoni, then who is a tzaddik? And if there are no tzaddikim, if there are no people who are completely righteous, then, as we'll learn later in this chapter, a tzaddik is the foundation of the world. If there are no tzaddikim, the world cannot exist. Or on the flip side, if Rabbah is a Beinoni, and we are not as great as Rabbah, that would make all of us in the category of a Rasha, of a wicked person. Which, okay, let's say that we're true about one of us or some of us, but if the entire world is in that category, you know what happened last time? God brought the flood, right? He destroyed the world. So we don't want that. If the entire world is wicked, then God will destroy it, as God did with the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So if Rabbah is a Beinoni, we have a big problem. Because if Rabbah is the greatest man alive, at least in his generation, then everyone else is wicked, is evil. And also, there are no tzaddikim, there are no Abrahams, so to speak, of the generation to save the world. So Abaye said, this can't be true. You cannot be a Beinoni. So we have to understand what exactly this Beinoni concept is. So the Alter Rebbe continues, Olahavin kol zeh Bayer hetev. And to understand this all very well, since the various passages that we've brought explain different levels, and we have to better understand what these various levels are. Also, we have another philosophical question. The Alter Rebbe says, "Vegam lahavin masha amar Eov." We also need to understand what Eov or Job asked God, as quoted in the Talmud Bava Basra Perek Aleph, Bava Basra chapter 1. He says, "Ribono shel olam, barasa tzadikim barasa rishayim chulu." Master of the universe, you've created righteous men and you've created evil men. In other words, nobody deserves your judgment, because whatever they are, that's how you created them. In other words, he was saying that God created the world in such a way that some people are evil and some people are good. And so nobody could change the course of creation, of what God had in mind, of how people should turn out. Now, this obviously flies in the face of one of the principles of our faith, which is, what's the challenge with this statement? Anybody? What's the problem with saying that people were created righteous or created evil?
It doesn't say that in Genesis.
What does it say?
It doesn't say that they were created either way.
Okay, very good. Also, philosophically, we know, and this is fundamental to our belief system, is that we have freedom of choice. right? So, and it's brought in the Gemara, and Maimonides brings that God tells the angel who's appointed over pregnancies, that this person is going to be weak, that person's going to be strong, this person's going to be wealthy, that person's going to be poor. But the one thing that God does not tell the angel to determine, so to speak, is whether the person will be righteous or evil. Why? Because everything is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven. Okay? So if everything's in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven, in other words, we do have freedom of choice. We have the choice to do right or wrong. That means that we were not created righteous or created evil. So how can Eov, come along and say that a person cannot become a tzaddik, a person cannot become fully righteous on his own accord unless God made him so? After all, we believe in the principle that everything's in the hands of heaven except for our own free choice, except for us fearing heaven. So which one is it? Do we have choice or do we not have choice? Do we have agency, or is it all predetermined, predestined?
We have free will.
We do. So we have to understand, why did Job say that God creates tzaddikim or creates rishaim if that's not quite the case? We also need to figure out what exactly a Beinoni is, because Rabbah is going around claiming he's a Beinoni, and as the Alter Rebbe will point out, he was mistaken in that. But let's understand that a little further. So what is a Beinoni? The Alter Rebbe says, "V'gam lahavin mahus madregos habeinoni." We also must understand the essence, the core of what is this level called a Beinoni. What are the ingredients? What's the key factor, determining factor to say this person is a Beinoni? So what I know is that shebevadai certainly einoi mechatza zechuyes mechatza. I know for certain that a Beinoni is not just somebody who does half sins and half merits, half good deeds, half bad deeds. Why is that? Why do we know for sure that a Beinoni is not half good and half bad? She'im Kain, because if we're going to posit that a Beinoni is a half and half kind of person, how can Rabbah, who is the greatest sage of his time, mistakenly convince himself that he has half sins? So for 16 waking hours of the day, 8 hours of that is spent doing terrible things. Really? I understand humility, but then there's just delusion, right? So, and the Alter Rebbe goes on to quote some facts about Rabbah, just to help us understand who this great rabbi was. It's known, the Talmud brings, that Rabbah's mouth never stopped learning. Every waking moment, there were words of Torah coming off his lips. To the extent that when the angel of death wished to end Rabbah's time in this world, he prevented it. The angel of death was not able to get in his way. They say also about King David. King David also knew that he was going to die on a Shabbos. God told him, "You're going to die. Your time is up." He didn't want to go. So he knew how to game the system. He knew that the angel of death cannot kill somebody while they're reciting words of Torah. So King David would make sure to recite words of Torah every Shabbos. And it happened one day, that one Shabbos, that King David heard a voice out in a tree. It was the angel of death who was basically using, I guess, whatever tools at its disposal, and made the sound of a child crying. And so King David went out to hear what was going on, and he tripped over something. He fell, and while he was falling, just in the being startled in the moment, he stopped saying words of Torah, and at that moment he died. The angel of death took him then. So, but otherwise, while you're learning Torah, the angel of death cannot take a hold of you, because Torah is more powerful even than the angel of death. So Rabbah also was able to do this, just in his case, without interruption. And I don't remember the exact circumstance of how he did die eventually, but the point is, he was somebody who was extremely studious. He was only doing good things. So the Alter Rebbe asks, how can somebody like that mistakenly think of himself that, I'm only half good. The other half of the time I'm committing sins. So certainly that's not what Rabbah meant when he said, I'm a Beinani. You want to know what a Beinani is? Look at me. I don't think he was saying, look at me, I do sins half the time. Now you might say, well, he's just being humble, but there's humble and then there's false humility, right? Somebody who's humble knows where they actually are in life, right? It says Moses was the most humble person on the earth. Not because he didn't realize that he was the leader of the Jewish people and that he went to Pharaoh and, helped effectuate the 10 plagues and so on and so forth. But rather, he realized where he was. He realized his important mission. He realized that he was doing it and carrying it out correctly. But he said, if somebody else did it, they'd do it a lot more perfect than I am. So that's humility. I recognize my position, but there's a sense of humility. Now, that was false humility. Obviously, Moses was the best guy for the job, no doubt. So similarly, when we're talking about Rabbah, the excuse of humility doesn't work. You can't say, oh, well, he was being humble, and so therefore he said something that was factually untrue, that he was sinning half the time. So you must say that the term Beinani does not mean someone who does half sins and half merits. And the Alter Rebbe continues, Va'id, and furthermore, when a person does a sin, at that moment, that person is called a complete Rasha. So you can't say when somebody who does half sins is a Beinani. No, somebody who yes, we're getting to that. A Beinani has temptations and a tzaddik does not. But that's the answer. We're still in the question. So a Beinani cannot be somebody who does half sins, because at the moment that he's doing a sin, he's called a Rasha. So doing half sins doesn't make you a Beinani, it makes you a Rasha. Even one sin makes you a Rasha. Now, on the flip side, he says in the brackets, if you then repented properly, you're now a complete tzaddik. So you can't say that a Beinani is somebody who once did a sin, but now repented, so he's sort of in between. No, if you actually repented, then you're now a tzaddik. So either you're a Rasha because you did a sin, or you're a tzaddik because you rectified that and you did teshuvah. As a matter of fact, if somebody is known and famous for their wickedness, their violent gang member or whatever, the worst leader of Hamas, God forbid, right? If somebody, let's say somebody is behaving like that who happens to be Jewish, and in the laws of Jewish marriage, somebody could make a kinyan, somebody can acquire a wife, can marry a woman on a condition. So he can say, we don't do that nowadays because it creates all sorts of legal problems. But theoretically, somebody can say, I am hereby betrothing you as my wife on condition that I am a complete tzaddik. According to many opinions, that marriage will take effect. Why? Or at least we should be concerned that maybe she's actually married. Why? Because maybe when he said those words, he was thinking to do tshuva. He was thinking to turn his life around. And because of that, because if he would turn his life around, he'd actually be a tzaddik. Therefore, the marriage may take effect. We don't know what's going on in his mind. So practically we say, either marry her again without a condition or divorce her. But there is that thought to say, maybe he is a tzaddik, right? Because we see that when somebody does teshuvah, they become a tzaddik. So what's this Beinoni phenomena? A Rasha is somebody who does sins, even one sin. And a tzaddik is somebody who either never did sins or repented from sins. So what's this Beinoni thing? So we'll have to stop here, and we'll go more into this, please God, next week, even though it's December 25th. But that doesn't change our schedule here. It might mean you have more free time, but we'll reconvene, same time, same venue.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.